Ukraine's own spy chief is delivering a stunning admission, and it cuts against months of official messaging. Kyrylo Budanov, the head of Ukraine's military intelligence, says the damage to Ukraine's mobilization came from within, through communication failures and internal decisions, and that Russian influence on this point is less than many believe. Ukraine's draft campaign, meant to sustain the war effort, is falling short. Figures cited by Ukrainian legislators and local media put mobilization at around 30,000 per month, and some argue that does not cover replacement needs. And Budanov says the damage came from within. This is a remarkable statement from one of the most powerful figures in Ukraine's security establishment. Budanov is not a critic or an opposition figure. He is the head of military intelligence, a man at the center of the war effort. Budanov points to a failed media campaign, internal power struggles, and personal ambitions overriding national survival. We all blame Russia, Budanov admits, but its influence isn't as great as everyone thinks. Instead, he points to deliberate decisions and careless missteps by Ukraine's own leadership. He says, "We destroyed our own mobilization. Those who say otherwise are wrong. We destroyed it ourselves." The admission is significant because it contradicts the official narrative that has dominated Ukrainian and Western media, that mobilization challenges are primarily the result of Russian interference or the inherent difficulty of wartime recruitment. The consequences are visible on the streets. Videos of draft officers forcing men into vans, so-called Busification clips, have gone viral. Public outrage is growing. Protests are breaking out. Authorities have demanded that the videos stop being shared, but the anger doesn't stop. The term Busification has become a symbol of the mobilization crisis. It refers to the practice of conscription officers grabbing men off the streets and forcing them into vehicles to be taken to recruitment centers. The videos show scenes that many Ukrainians find deeply troubling. The contrast between the official messaging and the reality on the streets has become impossible to ignore. Ukrainian officials have spoken of a nation united in defense against Russian aggression. But the Busification videos tell a different story, one of men running from conscription officers, of physical confrontations, of families torn apart. For many Ukrainians watching these scenes, the question is no longer just about the war with Russia. It's about what kind of society Ukraine is becoming in the process of fighting it. Ukraine lowered the draft age. It barred most adult men from leaving the country. Yet reports of illegal border crossings, bribes, and evasion have circulated widely. The exact figures cannot be independently verified. The measures were intended to ensure a steady supply of recruits. Instead, reports suggest they have driven many young men to take desperate measures to escape, crossing borders illegally, hiding from authorities, or paying bribes to avoid service. The flight of military-age men, whatever the precise number, represents not just a loss of potential soldiers, but a broader crisis of confidence in the mobilization system. Russia has published its own estimates of Ukrainian casualties. These figures cannot be independently verified, and Kyiv does not publish its own numbers, losses that Ukraine struggles to replace. Whatever the true casualty figures, which remain unknown, Western analysts acknowledge that Ukrainian losses have been significant and that the manpower challenge is one of the most serious threats to Ukraine's war effort. If the losses are substantial and recruitment is running below what military officials say they need, the arithmetic becomes challenging. The numbers matter because war is ultimately a matter of arithmetic. Soldiers are not infinitely replaceable. Every casualty represents not just a human tragedy, but a reduction in combat capability. If Ukraine is losing soldiers faster than it can recruit and train replacements, the military situation will inevitably deteriorate, regardless of how much Western equipment arrives. This is the fundamental math that Budanov's admission brings into sharp focus. The Russian Defense Ministry regularly releases videos of captured or surrendered Ukrainian soldiers. In these videos, the soldiers often describe on camera how they ended up on the front lines and the conditions they faced. One captured soldier says, "They said you'll be lucky, you're not going to the front, you'll carry supplies, but it turned out they abandoned us like kittens in a basement." These videos are released by the Russian military and should be viewed with that context in mind. However, they provide a window into the experiences of some Ukrainian soldiers that is rarely seen in Western media. One captured Ukrainian soldier speaking in a video released by Russia describes his experience. "I'm 48 years old, for crying out loud. What kind of warrior can I be at this age?" He describes being transferred from a rear support unit to a combat unit despite his age and lack of combat training. "I understood perfectly well that they were sending them just to slaughter," he says. The soldier's account suggests that as Ukraine's manpower shortage has deepened, the military has been pulling soldiers from support roles and sending them to the front, regardless of their age, training, or physical condition. Another captured soldier describes the situation in Mirnograd. In Mirnograd, there are quite a lot of them and also a significant number of fatalities. There are many FPV drones flying there. He says the commander sends everyone to positions, and from there they'll likely either be captured or become a 200. In military terminology, 200 refers to a soldier killed in action. The accounts paint a picture of units being sent into dangerous positions with little hope of success, and soldiers who feel they are being sacrificed rather than deployed strategically. One soldier explains how he ended up on the front lines despite originally serving in a support capacity. "I am a mobilized man. I came to the military unit in Dnipro in 2023 to feed the guys in the troops." He describes working in a support role for 2 years before suddenly being transferred to a combat unit. "On the 3rd and 8th, they discharged us from the unit, transferred us to a combat one, sent us to a distribution point, and then the 35th Brigade arrived, started drafting everyone." He says everyone being drafted was over 40 years old, men who had been working in support roles, not trained for frontline combat. The soldier continues, "I understood perfectly well that they were sending them just to slaughter." He describes trying to avoid being sent to the front through official channels, medical documentation, rehabilitation from injuries, appeals. "Until the last moment, I fought so that I wouldn't have to go anywhere," he says, to be discharged from this unit, from the combat unit, and all the rest. But in the end, he was sent anyway. His account suggests a system under strain, where the need for manpower is overriding normal processes for evaluating who should be sent to combat. The soldier describes a systematic process of pulling men from rear units across Ukraine. An order came for a unit of 60 people, for example, to send them, and that's it. They just took them and sent them off. And he says the practice began about a year ago and has spread across the country. This started from all Kharkiv and Dnipro and all over Ukraine, from all rear units. His conclusion is stark. There's just no one left to take. If this account is accurate, it suggests that Ukraine has exhausted the pool of readily available volunteers and is now scraping the bottom of the barrel, taking men from support roles who may not be suited for frontline combat. And the implications of this account are profound. If Ukraine has truly exhausted its pool of willing volunteers and is now forcibly conscripting men from support units, cooks, drivers, logistics personnel, it suggests the mobilization system is in crisis. These are not trained infantry soldiers. Many are middle-aged. Many have medical conditions. Sending them to frontline combat positions raises serious questions about both military effectiveness and the ethics of the mobilization process. Another captured soldier describes being abandoned by his command. "They abandoned us like kittens in a basement in Mirnograd." He describes his unit's mission. "Our task was to bring food supplies to the trench. We quietly brought these supplies to drop them by the trench and climb back up. But then they were ordered to stay. Just sit and wait." He describes being shelled in the basement. "When I got out, I saw how many potholes there were. How it held up is just unreal." Eventually, Russian forces arrived. One fine day, the tailgate opens, and thankfully, the guys at least didn't shoot. The soldier describes his surrender and subsequent treatment. "Don't surrender. They will shoot you immediately. That's what they told us. But all of it is lies." He says, "If you don't shoot anyone, no one shoots you. And the guys told us They kept all their promises. Well, not promises, but they kept their word. He describes being fed and treated decently. They gave us the same things, a cigarette to smoke and all, without any fuss. They said, please take whatever's on the table, eat it. His message to other Ukrainian soldiers, it's not that scary to surrender, honestly, because otherwise they just throw us as cannon fodder. These accounts come from Russian military sources and should be understood in that context. However, they raise questions about the conditions facing Ukrainian soldiers on the front lines. One soldier explains his motivation for surrendering. For me, my family is the most important thing. All these political convictions of theirs, I don't need them at all. And he says, I just want to live and to live a simple life with my family. I just want us all to live peacefully. His words reflect a sentiment that may be shared by many soldiers on both sides of the conflict, a desire for peace and a normal life rather than continued fighting. I don't need murders or anything else like that. Why is it needed by anyone? The soldier concludes with a message of hope. I'm certainly not despairing. I hope to finally see my family, to see my child, my mother, and all of them. His words humanize the conflict in a way that is often missing from official narratives on both sides. Behind the statistics and strategic analyses are individual soldiers, many of them conscripted, many of them middle-aged, many of them with families, who find themselves caught up in a war they did not choose. Budanov's admission that Ukraine destroyed its own mobilization is significant precisely because it comes from within the system. He is not an outside critic. He is not a political opponent of Zelensky. He is the head of military intelligence, a man who has been at the center of the war effort since it began. Budanov says the damage came from within, through communication failures and internal decisions, and that Russian influence on this point is less than many believe. And in a war defined by manpower, morale, and public trust, that admission may be as damaging as any battlefield loss. The Busification videos have become a symbol of eroding public trust. When citizens see draft officers grabbing men off the streets and forcing them into vans, it undermines confidence in the system. When soldiers are sent to the front with minimal training and little hope of success, word spreads. When families lose sons and fathers and husbands and the war shows no sign of ending, patience wears thin. Budanov's admission suggests that Ukraine's leadership is aware of these problems, but awareness and solutions are two different things. Trust, once lost, is extraordinarily difficult to rebuild, especially during wartime. The social contract between citizens and the state depends on a belief that sacrifices are shared fairly, that leaders are acting in good faith, and that the cause is worth fighting for. When that contract breaks down, when citizens see their neighbors dragged into vans, when soldiers feel abandoned by their commanders, when families flee rather than serve, the foundation of the war effort itself begins to crack. The manpower shortage raises urgent questions about the war's trajectory. If Ukraine cannot recruit enough soldiers to replace its losses, the military situation will continue to deteriorate. If public trust in the mobilization system collapses, recruitment will become even harder. If soldiers being sent to the front are poorly trained and demoralized, combat effectiveness will suffer. These are not abstract concerns. They are existential challenges for Ukraine's war effort. Western countries have provided Ukraine with billions of dollars in military aid, weapons, ammunition, vehicles, training. But there is one thing the West cannot provide: soldiers. Ukraine must find its own manpower. And Budanov is admitting that the system for doing so has failed. No amount of advanced weaponry can compensate for a shortage of trained, motivated soldiers to use it. This is the fundamental challenge facing Ukraine as the war continues into its third year. For the first time, Ukraine's top intelligence official is saying the quiet part out loud. The mobilization didn't fail because of Russia. It failed because of internal mistakes, deliberate decisions, careless missteps, personal ambitions, internal power struggles. These are Budanov's words, not Russian propaganda, not Western skepticism, but the assessment of Ukraine's own spy chief. And in a war defined by manpower, morale, and public trust, that admission may be as damaging as any battlefield loss. The question now is what comes next. Can Ukraine fix its mobilization system? Can it rebuild public trust? Can it recruit enough soldiers to sustain the war effort? Or will the internal failures Budanov describes continue to compound, making an already difficult military situation even worse? These are questions that Ukraine's leadership must answer. And so far, the answers have been elusive. What is clear is that the war's outcome may depend not just on what happens on the battlefield, but on whether Ukraine can solve the crisis within.